Okay, in this second part of your online lectures about mood disorders, we're going to define what we mean by mood episodes. If you recall from the last lecture, I mentioned that mood disorders, so major depressive disorder, bipolar 1, and bipolar 2, are all diagnosed based on the presence or absence of mood episodes. And there are three different types of mood episodes that are defined in the DSM-5: depressive episodes, manic episodes, and hypomanic episodes. First, we'll talk about depressive episodes. Now, there are three main criteria for depressive episodes. The first stipulates that in order to say that someone is experiencing a mood episode, he or she must have 5 or more symptoms that have been present during the same 2-week period and represent a change from previous functioning. But let's break this down a bit. So the first piece is that people have to experience at least 5 symptoms. And these symptoms can be quite diverse, including everything from having a depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report or observation made by others, to markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities. There can be significant weight loss when not dieting, or weight gain, or decreases or increases in appetite nearly every day. Insomnia or hypersomnia, psychomotor agitation or retardation, fatigue or loss of energy, feelings of worthlessness or excessive or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate or indecisiveness, and recurrent thoughts of death, recurrent suicidal ideation without a specific plan, or a suicide attempt or a specific plan for committing suicide. Now, one thing to know is that in order to say someone is experiencing a depressive episode, they must be experiencing the first and or the second symptoms. So even if you're experiencing the last 5 symptoms, you wouldn't be said to meet criteria for a depressive episode, because you have to experience either depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day, as indicated by either subjective report or observation made by others, and or markedly diminished interest or pleasure in all or almost all activities most of the day, nearly every day. The other thing I want you to notice here is that there's a lot of diversity, both within individual symptoms, but also just in the symptom list in general. So depending upon what 5 symptoms a person has, a depressive episode can look really, really different. For example, someone whose symptoms include depressed mood most of the day, significant weight loss, insomnia, psychomotor agitation, diminished ability to concentrate, and recurrent thoughts of death presents very differently than someone whose symptoms include depressed mood, anhedonia, or this diminished interest or pleasure, weight gain, hypersomnia, and fatigue. But both of these people, if they meet the remaining criteria, would both be said to be experiencing a depressive episode. So again, even though the diagnostic criteria give us a language with which to better understand psychiatric disorders, we have to remember that there's still considerable variation in how people with the same disorders present. The second piece of this first criteria is that the person has to experience all of these symptoms during the same 2-week period. And this is really important, because the reality is that likely we've all experienced a bunch of these symptoms at one time or another. But having one symptom, or even 2 or 3 symptoms at a time, isn't the same thing as having a depressive episode. In order to say someone is experiencing a depressive episode, those symptoms all have to co-occur in the same time period, in this case, for at least 2 weeks. Finally, the diagnostic criteria for depressive episodes also stipulate that those symptoms have to represent a change from previous functioning. So, for example, if someone always feels fatigued and always has trouble sleeping, those symptoms don't represent a change in previous functioning. In order to say someone is experiencing a depressive episode, the symptoms have to be out of the ordinary for them. So that's the first diagnostic criteria of a depressive episode. The second criteria is that the symptoms have to cause clinically significant distress and or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. And we've talked about this before in class. Just having symptoms isn't enough, right? In order for someone to meet diagnostic criteria for virtually any mental disorder, those symptoms have to be distressing or interrupting functioning. The final diagnostic criteria for depressive episodes state that the episodes can't be caused by a medical condition or a substance. And the reason why there's this criteria is because, as some of you may be able to imagine, there are any number of medical conditions or drugs that could cause you to experience these symptoms. But in that case, we wouldn't say the person is experiencing a depressive episode. So those are the diagnostic criteria for depressive episodes. Next are the manic episodes. And in order to say someone is experiencing or has experienced a manic episode, 4 criteria have to be met. We'll talk through each of these in turn. First, the person must have experienced a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally and persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy, lasting at least 1 week and present most of the day, nearly every day, or any duration if hospitalization is necessary. Now, there are a couple of things to highlight in there. One thing to note is the time frame. Unlike depressive episodes, where those 5 or more symptoms must have been present for at least 2 weeks, for manic episodes, the time frame is 1 week. Though there's also this caveat that if, as a result of this abnormally and persistently elevated expansive or irritable mood and abnormally and persistently increased goal-directed activity or energy, the person requires hospitalization, then the duration of the symptoms don't matter. The second diagnostic criteria for manic episodes states that during this 1 week period, 3 or more symptoms, or 4 if the mood is only irritable as opposed to elevated or expansive, must be present. And these symptoms can include things like inflated self-esteem or grandiosity, decreased need for sleep, being more talkative than usual or having this pressure to keep talking, experiencing a flight of ideas or subjective experience that thoughts are racing, distractibility, as either reported by someone else or observed by the person themselves, an increase in goal-directed activity or psychomotor agitation, and excessive involvement in activities that have a high potential for painful consequences. What is more, similar to with depressive episodes, the symptoms of manic episodes have to represent a noticeable change from usual behavior, so it can't just be par for the course. Next, the DSM stipulates that in order to say someone is experiencing a manic episode, the mood disturbance and related symptoms have to be severe enough that 1 or more of 3 things occur. Either that they cause significant impairment in social or occupational functioning, that they necessitate hospitalization to prevent harm to self or others, or that there are associated psychotic features. And when we say psychotic features, we mean delusions or hallucinations, which we'll define further when we talk about schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. And finally, just like with depressive episodes, the symptoms of a manic episode can't be caused by either substances or another medical condition. The final type of mood episode we need to talk about are hypomanic episodes. And just to preface this for you, hypomanic episodes are often the ones that people have the hardest time wrapping their heads around. So just to remind you, remember in the first mood disorders lecture, we talked about the range of mood symptoms from severe depression all the way to severe mania. Hypomania falls right here, above what we would consider a balanced mood, but below mania. And that makes sense given the name. Hypo meaning under or less, and mania, which we just described. So hypomania is a mood that's less elevated than mania, but still more elevated than what is balanced or average. Much of the diagnostic criteria for hypomania look pretty similar to the diagnostic criteria for mania. So just like mania, the diagnostic criteria for hypomania specify that people must experience a distinct period of abnormally and persistently elevated, expansive, or irritable mood, and abnormally and persistently increased activity or energy, and at least 3 symptoms, or 4 if the mood is only irritable, that represent a noticeable change from usual behavior. And those symptoms are exactly the same as they are for manic episodes. In addition, similar to manic episodes, in hypomanic episodes, the episode cannot be attributed to the physiological effects of a substance or to another medical condition. But there are some key differences between mania and hypomania as well. The first difference is that unlike manic episodes, where the mood disturbance and increased energy or activity have to be present for at least a week, for hypomanic episodes, the time period is 4 consecutive days. Next, the diagnostic criteria for hypomanic episodes specify that the episode must be associated with an unequivocal change in functioning that is uncharacteristic of the individual when they're not symptomatic. The disturbance in mood and the change in functioning also has to be observable by others, and most importantly, the episode can't be severe enough to cause marked impairment in social or occupational functioning or to necessitate hospitalization. Furthermore, the diagnostic criteria specify that if there are psychotic features, the episode is by definition manic. And this criteria really is the part that best differentiates manic episodes from hypomanic episodes, because whereas manic episodes must have significant negative implications for a person's life, that's not really the case for hypomanic episodes. So another way to think about these differences between mood episodes is like this. If I called this my mind, then this would be depression, this would be mania, and this would be hypomania. All right, that's all for now. In class, we'll talk through some examples of what these different types of episodes look like. Make sure you come to class prepared to ask questions you have about what's been covered here. See you in class.